All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Beautiful daf ahead of us today to thank our sponsor, our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Cheshvan. To thank Yanky and Aliza, Statman and Yitzy and Rebecca Statman for dedicating the Shurim this month in commemoration of the first yarzheit of their sister, Menucha Shaindl Yehudis, Zichron Livracha, Bas Dovid Yosef. To thank Shmuel and Robyn Korobkin for dedicating the Shurim this month in commemoration of the 25th yarzheit of Robyn's mother, Pessa Mira, Bas Chaim, Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, the Neshamas will have an Aliyah and the families a Nechama. With that, let us begin. Great daf ahead of us today. Really great daf. So we'll say today's daf is Chav Ches 28. We are picking up in Menucha Hashem at the Mishnah on Chav Zayin Amud Beis 27b, 3 lines up from the bottom. Says the Mishnah, Nodrin lahargin ulacharamin ulamochsin. So we'll say this is a very interesting case. In this case over here, so what's happening? A person is being threatened with the seizure of property. So what they're going to do is, they're essentially going to lie. It's incredible. Okay. Wow, okay, I didn't even think about that till now. Good. They're essentially going to lie to go ahead and save their property. But the way they're going to lie is by the making of a false neder. But again, this is an unlawful, they're trying to save themselves from an unlawful seizure of property. So they're going to make a neder to go and attest to a truth that is not really true in order to convince the person not to seize their property. That's the backdrop. Watch this. Okay, so nodrin, you can make a neder, laharagin, to someone who's going to kill you, lechamramin. Charamin, ultimately, again, is a robber. Again, we'll define these terms. Ulamuchsin, tax collector. Now, we'll say, let me draw your attention for a moment to Rashi. Take a look at Rashi on the right, on the left-hand side. Lahargin, Rashi says, Shuhoreg al iske mamon. This is talking about someone who will kill someone else for money. Okay, so what's happening? Shem ba lahargo. So we'll say, so let's say again, so this hargin comes to seize my money, seize my property. So what happens? They both say, obviously, if he's literally going to kill me, then this whole thing, of course, is not a shayla, right? We're talking about someone who is known to use force in order to extract money. So what's the halacha? Yachalader al zeh shu truma, yomer neder zeh alai im eno shel truma, af al pi she'eno shel truma, kedei shelo yitlein, lefi sheyesh chiyuv misa lezu, v'neder mutar, v'hainu nami neder owns. So actually, let me read the rest of the Mishnah. Sorry. Nodrin lahargin ulecharamin ulemuchsin shi truma, af al pi she'eno truma, shein shal beis melech, af al pi she'eno shal beis melech. We'll say, here's the case. Here's the case. Someone comes to me, they want to go ahead and seize, let's say, my produce. Right? So I go ahead and I tell the individual that you don't seize this produce, it's truma. Or it belongs to the king. Now I will say, now how do I back up that statement? So the way I back up that statement is I say that ultimately, again, if this is not truma, then all of the fruit of the world should be usher to me. So in other words, I'm backing up this statement with a neder. So the neder, obviously, what's interesting about this is who is the hargin, charmin, and muchsin? Who are these people? They're Jews. That's what we're talking about over here. So remember again, so I have a Jewish thief that's coming to me. I said, listen, don't take that. That's truma. So you'll say to yourself, but the guy's a thief. What is it going to matter if it's truma? I will say, understand. All of us live with inconsistencies, right? And the way it works with inconsistencies is, right, I'm very makbid on this, but could care less about this. So there are people who could care less about theft, but it doesn't mean that they're going to go ahead and eat truma, right? So again, it sounds strange, but Lamaisa, we all do it. Careful with this, totally reckless with this. So over here, I'm telling the thief, listen, don't take that produce, it belongs to the king. Right? Don't take that produce, it's truma. And the way I back up that statement is with a neder. Literally, all the produce of the world should be usher to me if this thing that you're about to seize is not truma. So that's how I show the veracity of my claim. So that's hargin. Look at the next Rashi, charamin, shulistim ba'alma she'eno horeg. Charamin, say, are just good old thieves. They don't kill. They just steal. In other words, they won't chas v'shalom kill anyone, but they'll just steal. And muchsin, Rashi says over here, is notal mechas hamelech v'rotza lital perosa bal karko. This is a tax collector. who wants to go ahead and not only take taxes, but also wants to seize my produce. So now, once again, Rashi says, Afa b'she'ein shel truma, sheyachol lidar she'ein shel truma, kedei shelo yitlei. Shabbos says, so the idea over here is that halacha l'maisa, I'm taking a neder to back up a false claim. So the Mishnah says that I'm allowed to go ahead and do this. Now I will say, why am I allowed to do this? So if Rashi points out over here, this falls into the category also of nidrei onsin. Now I will say, if you notice, by the way, this is a little bit different. Because what was our previous definition of nidrei onsin? How do we define nidrei onsin? Right? So nidrei onsin was, right, I make a neder that I want Shimon to come to my house. I want Reuben to come to my house for lunch. Right? And Reuben, if you don't come, all of my property is usher to you. Then what happens? So Reuben, the subject of the neder, experiences an ones and is unable to comply. In this is right. So the typical case of nidrei onsin is that the subject of the neder is the one who experiences the ones. This is a different kind of case because who's experiencing the ones over here in this case in our Mishnah? Who is it? The vower himself. Right, the vower himself. I, the one making the vow, and experiencing the only extenuating circumstance, and therefore I'm making a false neder in order to go ahead and preserve my property. So another example of nidrei onsin. So what's the scope of this? This is actually quite interesting. Bishamai says, bakol nodrin. The truth is, you could do anything, right? You could in other words, literally bakol nodrin means you can make a neder, or you can make any kind of neder, top of chavches. Even, chutz mivishvua. So Beis Shammai says, look, you can make this false neder, right? You can make this false neder, it's nidrei onsin, no problem, in order to preserve your property. What can't you do? You can't make a shvua. So you cannot utilize a shvua for something like this. Or Beis Hillel says, no, af b'shvua. So what is actually very interesting. Beis Hillel says, you can even make a false shvua in order to go ahead and back up the claim. So I'll say, so look at the Ran for just a moment. Top Ran of Chavches Amud Aleph. Chutz b'shvua, Pessa Mira dichsiv lo Yanky. So Beis Shammai says, you can't use a shvua. Why not? Because a shvua is more chamer than a neder. So therefore, again, cannot go ahead and use a shvua. So both say, so fundamental machlokes over here. So now first statement of the Mishnah, you could go ahead and use this in nidrei onsin. You can make a false neder to preserve your property. Can you make a shvua? Beis Shammai, no. Beis Hillel, yes. Let's go back there. Beis Shammai omrim, listen to this on both sides. This is interesting. Furthermore, Beis Shammai omrim, lo yiftach lo beneder. So Beis Shammai go ahead and they also say, you should not offer the neder. In other words, in Beis Shammai's model, the way this works is like this. Someone, we'll call him Ruvain, is coming to seize my property. So he's one of these haragin, right, charmin or muchsin. He's coming to seize my property. So what happens? I say, no, it's truma. It's truma. So what does Ruvain say? Make a neder. I learned Daf Yomi, even though I'm a thief, right? I learned Daf Yomi, right? So Lamais again, I know how serious Nedarim are. Make a neder saying that if this is not truma, you will become answer to all the produce in the world. Okay, I can make the neder. So Beis Shammai says, however, the only way to make the neder in this situation is if the neder comes at the behest of the thief. In other words, I can't willingly volunteer to make a false neder. Beis Hillel omrim af yiftach lo. Beis Hillel says no, not true. You could even offer up the neder. In other words, after I go ahead and I say Ruvain, no, don't steal his property. It's truma. I can offer up the neder in order to bolster my false claim. So the Gemara says as follows: Beis Shammai also say so. That's machlokes. So both say so. Machlokes number one. So again, everyone's agreeing on the premise, right? That halacha l'maisa you can make a false neder, what we call nidrei onsin, in order to safeguard your property. Can you make a shvua, false shvua? Beis Shammai, no. Beis Hillel, yes. Can you proactively offer up the neder to the thief in order to bolster your position? Beis Hillel, yes. Beis Shammai, no. Another machlokes. Here we go. Beis Shammai omrim b'mashu madiro, u Beis Hillel omrim af b'mashu einu madiro. So we'll say this is fascinating. So let's go with the approach over here. That it was the thief who initiated the neder. Okay, we'll say this is fascinating. So let's say, right, so let's just play this out. Right, I'm sitting in my house, minding my own business. Reuven the thief comes in. He wants to steal produce. The way I try to save my produce is by telling him, don't steal it, it's truma. It's truma. Okay. So what happens? See, he obviously doesn't believe me. So what happens now? So I'll say, in this case, he's telling me, fine, silver, make a neder. Make a neder. So we'll say, so now watch this. We'll frame the case in just a moment. Let's say he tells me to make a neder, and he tells me to make a particular neder, and I add on to that neder. I say, of course, and I'll even make it stronger. So we'll say, so watch this. So Beis Shammai says, if I make the neder as he proposed it, then ultimately, again, it's nidre onsin, not binding. But anything I add on to that, I am bound by. Beis Hillel says, no. Even if you add on, the entire neder takes on the status of nidre onsin, and therefore, ultimately, again, is not a problem. So I'll say, watch this, Kate. That's such a good case. Kate, what's a good example of this? Kate Amar lo. Konim ishti nanisli. So we'll say, listen to this. So let's say what happens. So let's just play this out. I'm in my house. Reuven's coming to take my produce. I say, Reuven, no, don't take it. It's truma. Reuven says, okay. I want you to take the following neder. That halacha l'maisa. If that your wife will be usher to you if this is not truma. That's the neder that Reuven wants me to take. So I take the neder and I say, Bali, I'll do you one even better, right? Va'omer konam ishti ubanai nanenli. I take a neder that neither my wife or my children will get any hana from me if this is not truma. So what did I just do? I added on my kids. So now both sides. Now again, remember, Reuben the thief never put the kids in the neder, right? It was just about the wife. He put in the kids. I put in the kids. So now what's the status? Well, listen to this. So Shammai says, Ishto muteres. So my wife is mutter. Why? Because again, my wife is covered under nidre onsin. Ubana vasurin. Shammai says, why did you add on your kids? Right? You add me adding on my kids. That was of my own volition, of my own choice, and therefore that part of the neder will actually be binding. Beis Hillel says, no, elu ve'elu mutarin. Both are going to be mutter, because Beis Hillel sees this generally all ensconced, right, within Nidre Onsin. So I will say again, let's chazer the Mishnah once more. So here's what we have. Mishnah is introducing us to a new type of Nidre Onsin, different than the previous Mishnah. In this case, again, I'm trying to preserve property. I essentially make a false neder in order to bolster a false claim. All of it being made in order to preserve my property. Mishnah says, it works. Okay, now 3 machloks in Beis Shammai Silo. Can you make a false shvuah in order to bolster your false claim? Beis Shammai, no. Beis Hillel, yes. Now, okay, that's machloks 1. Machloks 2. Can I, in order to safeguard my property, proactively offer to make a neder? Beis Shammai, no. Beis Hillel, yes. In a case where the thief is telling me I have to make a neder, he tells me to make neder A. But I make neder A plus B. What's the status? Beis Shammai says you're on the hook for B, for the plus B. Beis Hillel says no, it's all called nidre onsin. Beautiful. What a good Mishnah. Good Mishnah, good. We'll say Gemara. Varmar Shmuel, so we'll say, so now listen to this. What's interesting in the Mishnah is that halacha l'maisa, the Mishnah grouped 3 types of people together. Right? Hargin, which is a thief who will kill, right, if he doesn't get what he wants. Charamin, who is someone who's going to steal but he's not going to kill. And Muhsin is a tax collector. So the Gemara says, tax collector, V'hamar Shmuel, Dina Malchusa Dina. I don't understand, why are you putting this tax collector in there? If the tax collector is showing up, right, and the tax collector is collecting taxes, even Jews have an obligation to pay taxes, right? In other words, that right, everybody has to pay taxes. So what's the pshat? Why? In other words, why would I be permitted to go ahead and lie about the status of the produce? And it sounds like get out of my tax obligation, right? Dina d'machusa dina. So says the Gemara. Amar Rav Chinav, Amar Rav Kahana, Amar Shmuel, b'muchas she'ein lo kitzva. So it's actually very interesting. So what are you talking about over here? If you look at the Ran for just a moment on the left-hand side, about 3 lines into the short lines, B'muchas she'in lo kitzva, the Chayvan she'kein, lav dino. Both say, this is talking about a tax collector who just collects whatever he wants. She'in lo kitzva, he collects whatever he wants. So we'll say, that's no longer dina d'malchusa dina. Like, dina d'malchusa dina is, the government says you have to pay X, because you have to pay X, but there's a kitzva. Any tax that essentially is without end, and without any type of amount, but again, up to the volition of the tax collector, that's not a just tax. I will say, by the way, this is actually an interesting discussion in general about dina de malchusa dina only applying to laws which are quote unquote just. Just. In other words, the law itself has to have a basic legal precedent and be rooted in a normative legal framework. If something is just arbitrary or potentially despotic, then at the end of the day, that doesn't fall under dina de malchusa dina. So if you have a tax collector who's just collecting whatever he wants, however he wants, whenever he wants, that's not dina de malchusa dina. That's not a law in which a person is obligated to go ahead and abide by. And that's why the Ran says over here, he says, that's not dina. What do we call that? Ella chamsanusa. Chamsanusa. People say, what's chamsanusa? Chamsanusa is theft. That's called theft. And therefore, ultimately, again, theft does not have the obligations, ultimately, of dina de malchusa dina. There happens to be a lot on this page to talk about this. Tosas has an interesting piece about this. TORAH has an interesting piece about this. But we're just going to go right there. So the Gemara says, or the Berabiyanei Amar, Menucha Shaindl Yehudis. This is even better. Who's the tax collector we're talking about? A self-appointed tax collector. That's a good job. Right? In other words, he just woke up today and he decided, I'm the tax collector. The common denominator amongst these two answers is, this is not the normative, established collecting of taxes. If it was, I would be obligated to pay it. Dina de malchusa dina. See there again, this is some type of just arbitrary tax collection that is not. Shabbos say, by the way, Jews were subject to for centuries to this type of tax collection. Ultimately, again, we're just at the whim of the collector, at the whim of the local poritz, at the whim of whoever it was, and it wasn't rooted in any type of normative legal system. So that's not called dina de malchusa dina. Self-appointed tax collector, not dina de malchusa dina. Good, so let's go weiter. So it says the Gemara, shein shel beis melech, afa pi shein shel beis melech. So remember again, so in the Mishnah, what am I doing? So let's go back to the original case. I'm sitting in my house, minding my own business. Reuven shows up, right? Reuven shows up. Reuven is a thief. Whatever kind of thief he is, or he's a self-appointed tax collector. He wants to seize my produce. I tell him, Reuven, no. Don't take that. That's truma. Or, again, other possibilities, that belongs to the king. Bad idea to take it, okay? And then I take a neder to support that false claim. I will say now, again, to be clear, I'm not taking, the neder is not, I take a neder that this is truma, right? Because, that's not a neder. That could be a shvuah. I swear that this is truma, but that's not a neder. The neder in question is, I'm taking a neder about something else, and I'm hinging that neder on the truth that this is truma. So now the Gemara says, Hey nadar, what's the neder? What neder am I making in this case? Amarav ba'omer, here it is, Ya'asru peiros ha'olam, the fruit of the world should become asr to me, im einon shel beis hamelech. If this produce doesn't belong to the king. So that's the neder I'm making, right? The produce of the world should become usher to me if this produce doesn't belong to the king. So in other words, really what I'm saying is, I'm so sure that this belongs to the king that the produce, that the isser will not devolve upon me. Here's the Gemara. Here's the problem the Gemara says. Kevan damri asru isseru alei kol pere alma. But why doesn't that work? In other words, at the end of the day, once you go ahead and you say that the peros of the world should become usher to me, so why doesn't that trigger an isser? To which the Gemara says, Ba'omer hayom. All right, I will say, what's the case? The case is where I say today. I will say, so the way I frame the neder is, the fruit of the world should become usher to me if this produce doesn't belong to the king. Today. Let me say it, sorry. The produce of the world should be usher to me today, if this is not the property of the king. So I will say, really what the Gemara is entertaining is, maybe the neder does work. But what's my exposure? 1 day, fine. So to safeguard my property, I'm not going to eat any produce that day. Fine. So the Gemara says, 1 second. Kevan damar yasr, so the Gemara says, da'amar hayom lo makalo minei muchas. I will say, so 1 second. At the end of the day, if that's the neder you're making, how is that going to help you with the thief? In other words, Bepashtos, the thief is an intelligent guy also. What did he hear? Right, he heard me made a neder for 1 day. Shkoyach. Anyone can make a neder not to enjoy fruits for 1 day. So how is that going to get the thief off my back if all I'm doing is taking a 1 day neder? Ba'omer belibo hayom umotzi b'svas of stam. Wow. I will say, what's the case? The case is where I tell Reuven, don't take the produce. Why? Because the produce is truma. Reuven said, and I say to Reuven, I'm going to bolster with the neder. What's the neder? Reuven, right? All the produce of the world should become asur to me if this produce is not truma. Now, in my heart, I have in mind that what should be the duration of that neder? Right? Today. But ultimately, again, I don't articulate it, right? So, in other words, I make it tonight in my heart, not tonight. I make a qualification of the neder in my heart, but I do not articulate that qualification. I don't articulate it. So Rabbi says, so what's the chap? So the Gemara says, listen to this. Rabbi says, listen to this. When it comes to Nedarim, I think I mentioned this in yesterday's shir also, Rabbi say, when it comes to Nedarim, we go, and by same thing by Shavuos, we go after what you say. We could, and it makes sense. We can't start trying to figure out what you're thinking. Right? We have to go after what you say. We normally say dvarim shebalev inam dvarim. So what did I say? By the way, I don't know if I mentioned this yesterday, but well, let's finish this up. So even though normally we say dvarim shebalev inam dvarim, when you make a neder, we don't look at what you're thinking. The only thing we focus on is what you're saying. So Lamai say again, legabi onsin shayni. The exception to that rule will be a nidre onsin. Shabbos said, what's interesting about this, the Gemara is suggesting is, the neder that I make to safeguard my property, it kind of works. Right? And it kind of works. It does work. But it has limited fallout because in my heart, I'm qualifying it and saying that the neder should only last for 1 day. The chiddush over here is that I had in mind for the 1 day, but I did not explicitly articulate it. And even though when it comes to Nedarim, if you don't explicitly articulate, it doesn't create a reality. Nidre onsin are different, and even a condition or a qualification that I have in my heart is enough to go ahead and be binding, even though I never articulate. I will say, incredible. Absolutely incredible. But I will say also, it's important legabe relationships. This idea of dvarim shebalev einam dvarim. One of the most important things in relationships is to make sure to articulate how you feel about someone you care about, whether it's your wife, or whether it's your children, or whether it's your parents, or whether it's your friends. Very often in life, we assume that people who we love know how we feel about them. They know, my wife knows that I love her. What do Chazal tell us? Dvarim shebalev einam dvarim. Just because you think it, right? That doesn't create reality. What creates realities? Words create realities. So if you have people in your life who you care deeply about, make sure to explicitly articulate to them often how you actually feel about them, and do not rely on them knowing what you feel inside your heart. Such an incredible Gemara. Good, let's go weiter. So we'll say now, the Gemara gives a quote from the Mishnah. It's interesting actually, I don't know why, but it's like a 6-line quote, pretty much re-quotes half of the Mishnah. So the Mishnah said, quote, between the two das, B'shamai omrim, bakol. So again, this is B'shamai omrim, b'medhu madiro, b'mashu madiro, b'silo omrim, af b'she'ino madiro. Keitzad, Amr lakonim ishti nanisli, v'amr konim ishti ubanai nanili. Beishamai omrim, ishto mutarev subana basur, ve'sila omrim elu ve'elu mutarev. So let's remember again, what was this case? So this was the case ultimately again, same case. I'm sitting in my house, minding my own business. Reuven comes in, wants to steal my produce. I say, Reuven, don't steal the produce. It's truma. What does Reuven say? Reuven says, I don't believe you. So he says, the only way I'll believe you, this is the thief telling me, is I want you to take a neder. I say, fine. So what's the neder Reuven wants me to take? Reuven says, Konim ishti nanisli. I want you to take the following neder. That ultimately, again, if this produce is not truma, then what? Ultimately, your wife will be prohibited to you. Or he wants me to say, my wife will be prohibited in hana to me. Or I prohibit hana from myself to my wife. I say, no problem. I'll take it, and I'm also going to throw in my kids in there. My kids should also be asr ta'ana from me if this is not truma. So we'll say, so now what's the halacha? So Shammai says, 1 second, who told you to put in your kids? Right? You chose to put in your kids. Or I should say, I chose to put in my kids. Therefore, halacha the neder is actually binding by my children. Beis Hillel says, no, even though I chose of my own volition to go ahead and put in my kids, it all falls under the umbrella of nidre onsin and is not a problem. Okay, so let's analyze. So the Gemara says as follows: Amar Rav Huna Tana Beis Shammai omrim lo yiftach lo b'shvua. So we'll say furthermore again, we learned in a brayso that what? Beis Shammai says, don't offer up a shvua. Don't offer up a shvua. Right? So the Gemara says, I'm sorry. So Beis Shammai lo yiftach lo b'shvua. Beis Hillel omrim af yiftach lo b'shvua. Shabbos said, this is now another interesting discussion over here. Can you offer up a shvua? In other words, can I be proactive in offering up to take a shvua to bolster my false claim? So Beis Shammai says no. Beis Hillel says yes. So the Gemara says this is interesting. The Beis Shammai b'shvuhu de lo yiftach ha b'neder yiftach lo. So we'll say it sounds like according to this brayso, according to Beis Shammai, you can't offer up a shvua. But what can you offer up? What can you offer up? A neder. Here's the problem. It contradicts our Mishnah. V'hatnan Beis Shammai omrim lo yiftach lo b'neder. Beis Shammai says you can't even offer up a neder, right? Rabbi said that was Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai says you can only offer up a responsive neder, but you can't proactively offer up a neder. So what's going on? Rabbi says so. I've seen the Bryce and the Mishnah. The Bryce sounds like Beis Shammai says you can't offer up a shvuah, but ultimately again you can offer up a neder. Our Mishnah is according to Beis Shammai you can't even proactively offer up a neder. Visu, furthermore, miftachud lo yiftach lo b'shvuah. Furthermore, again, I'll say, what does Beis Shammai prohibit? Beis Shammai says you can't offer up a shvuah. You can't offer it up. But what does it sound like? That if the thief wants me to take a shvuah, ha, meidar nader b'shvuah. They will say, but if the thief asks me to take a shvuah, it sounds like what? I can take it, according to Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai says you can't proactively offer up a shvuah. But it sounds like if the thief asked me to take a shvuah, that in fact would be permitted. Vatran, here's the problem. Vatran, we learned. Beis Shammai omrim bakol nodrin chutz mi shvua. You know, in our Mishnah, Beis Shammai says you can't take a shvua at all, So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says, "Well, see here the machlokes. So really, the machlokes is stira is really in the position of Beis Shammai, because I have a Mishnah that indicates to me Beis Shammai says you can't take a shvua at all, and you can't even offer up a neder. A brayso that seems to indicate that you can't offer up a shvuah, but what? You can take a shvuah if you're asked to, and you can offer up a neder. So what's going on over here? So here we go, we'll say. So Tanamas Nisan ben neder lo diacha kocha de Beis Shammai. So ultimately, we'll say, the Mishnah is framed in a way to tell us the position of Beis Shammai's position. Tell us the Beis Shammai's position. We'll say, what's Beis Shammai's position? Beis Shammai says, you can't even offer up a neder. That's Beis Shammai's position. You can't even offer up a neder. Right? Now we'll say, obviously, so that's the position of Beis Shammai. Now let's work from there. If I can't even offer up a neder, then it goes without saying what? I certainly can't offer up a shvuah. Not only that, I'm not even allowed to take a shvuah if asked. That's the shita of Beis Shammai. And the Mishnah is phrased to express the strength of Beis Shammai's position. On the flip side, the Bryce Rebbe is phrased in a way to express the strength of Beis Hillel's position. What does Beis Hillel say, Rebbe say? You could even offer up a shvuah. So Rebbe says, so really it turns out Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are on opposite ends of the spectrum over here. So let's go through this for just a moment. Right? What does Beis Shammai allow you to do? Right? What's the ceiling? Right? According to Beis Shammai, what's the ceiling? What are you allowed to do? If asked to take a neder, you could take a neder, even knowing that it's a false neder to bolster a false claim. This is under nidrei onsin. That's the ceiling. According to Beis Shammai, you can't even offer up. You can't proactively offer to take a neder, and you certainly can't what? Offer to take a shvuah. That's the ceiling. Beis Hillel, what's Beis Hillel's ceiling? Beis Hillel's ceiling is pretty dramatic. You could even offer what? Even offer shvuah. You can even proactively offer a shua. So once I'm allowed to do that, Rabbi say, then pretty much again, I could do everything under it all. So obviously I could proactively offer up a neder, and of course I could take a neder or a shua if asked to do so. Incredible. That's the machlokes. So as Rav Ashi Amar Haki Katani, Rav Ashi understands that we say the following: Beis Shammai Omrim Ein She'ila B'Shua, or Beis Hillel Omrim Yesh She'ila B'Shua. So we'll say this is actually interesting. It's not immediately clear what this has to do with the rest of the Gemara, but watch this. So Rav Ashi says, this may be embedded in a different discussion. Take a look first at Rashi. Rashi says over here, Ravashi Amar Hachi Katani. We'll say it's about 15 lines from the bottom. Ravashi Amar Hachi Katani. Hailo Yiftach de Braisa Lo mashmi kidamin de be'onsin koi. So Rabbi say, this is actually very interesting. So Rav Ashi comes along and he reads our Mishnah differently. Rabbi say, if you keep your finger on the place, but you just go back to the top of the daf for just a moment. So Rabbi say, look at the second line into the Mishnah. Beishamai omrim, lo yiftach lo beneder, ubeisila omrim yiftach lo. So Rabbi say, this is very interesting. I'm sorry. The incorrect, not the Mishnah. I'm sorry, the Brisa. The Brisa said, right at the beginning of the two dots, right? Beishamai omrim lo yiftach lo b'shvua, ubeisila omrim yiftach lo. So Rabbi say, so up until this moment, before we get into Rav Ashi, how are we reading that phrase? What is yiftach? How do you translate yiftach? How do you translate yiftach? Proactively offer. So we were aligning this brisa with our Mishnah. And when you combine the two, what you have over here is as follows. Beis Hillel says, you can even proactively offer to take a shvuah, certainly proactively offer to take a neder, and certainly responsibly offer a neder or a shvuah. Beis Shammai telling me the most you could do is reactively take a neder. You can't proactively offer anything. Lo yiftach anything, not shvuah, not neder. Rav Ashi says, no, that's not what the brisa means. The brisa, when it says lo yiftach or yiftach b'shvuah, is talking about something different. Back to Rashi. Hai lo yiftach the brisa, lo mashmin kidamin de be'onsin kai. Rav Ashi says, why are you saying that the topic of this brisa is nidre onsin? That's not the topic. Ella hai lo yiftach the beishamai savri, lo yiftach lo achacham pesach lecharata, lish'al al shavua. So, de'ein she'ela l'shvuah lefnei achacham. The leika lamedak minei shum kusha. The Rav Ashi says the Brisa is about something totally different. When it says lo yiftach, I will say it's talking about creating a Pesach through charata for Shvuah. I will say when we spoke about annulling a neder. So what did we discuss? That there are two ways effectively to. You could create a Pesach for annulment of a neder. I will say what's one of the ways you could create a Pesach? Charata, remorse. So now says Rav Ashi, there's a machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Is there charata by a shavua or not? In posting, can you create a Pesach of charata for a shavua? Beis Hillel says yes. Beis Shammai says no. Take a quick look at the Ran. The Ran says over here, Rav Ashi Amar Haki Kamar Beis Shammai in Sheila b'Shvua v'lo matukma hach Brisa b'nishpa lahargin klal. The Brisa is not talking about the case of the Mishnah of Nidre Onsin. This is what it means to say. Mishnishpal davar lo yiftach lo chacham lahati lo shvua. So she'ein she'ela b'shvua ubeisla omrim yesh she'ela. So what says incredible? Rashi says there's a much more. This says the Brisa has nothing to do with our Mishnah, right? Rather, again, what the Brisa is talking about is in general. Is there such a thing as creating a Pesach for the annulment of a shvua? Right, so Beis Shammai says no, Beis Hillel says yes. Beautiful, Rabbi say. So now we close out this sugya. So here's what we're left with, Rabbi say. What the takeaway over here is that the Mishnah ultimately teaches us a new category of nidre onsin. Namely, again, taking a neder or a shvua for that matter, because we paskin like Beis Hillel, that Allah chalamais you could take a neder or a shvua in order to go ahead, a false neder or shvua, in order to safeguard your property. We paskin pretty much like Beis Hillel the whole way through. Namely, you could proactively offer up the neder, right? Number two, you could even take a shvua, and ultimately, again, even if you were prompted by the thief to take a shvua, and you added onto that shvua, even what you added on is under the umbrella of nidre onsin, and therefore is not binding at all. Beautiful. Mishnah. So, hari netios ha'elu karban, so we'll say interesting case here. Interesting case, right? I say I make a neder. These saplings, or these, right? We'll use saplings, right? Netios is sapling. These netios ultimately again should be a carbon. If I do not cut them down, okay. Rabbi say take a quick look at the Ran for just a moment. Last round on the page. Har netios ha'elu carbon v'yeshlam, right? Kilomar dekdusha. Actually, let's. I'm sorry, I have to read a little bit more. So talis zu carbon im einon israfes. This talis, this cloak, should be like a carbon, meaning should be prohibited. Right, should be prohibited if it's not burned. What's talacha? Yeshlan pidyon. ultimately, again, they can be redeemed. Now, what does this mean? Take a look at the Ran. Now look at the Ran. So we'll say what it means is, when I make this neder, right, when I go ahead and I make this statement, these saplings should be like a carbon, should have the kedusha of a carbon, if they're not cut down. If they're not cut down, in other words, if they remain in their uncut state, ultimately, again, they should have sacrificial kedusha, like a carbon, right? Or if this talus is not burned, ultimately, again, it should be like a carbon. So what's the halacha? The halacha is such a carbon designation works. In other words, they become consecrated. Ad shetzrichos pidyon, to the point, ultimately, again, that if you want to once again make them chulin, what do you have to do? You have to actually redeem them. So the Gemara says, fine. That's the case. That's the case. Fine. So if I say these netios should be a carbon until they are cut down, or talis zu carbon ad shetisarif, or this cloak should be like a carbon until it is burned. What's the halacha? Amud Beis will say ein lahen pidyon. Ultimately, again, there is no redemption for these items. Okay, we'll see exactly what these cases mean in the Gemara. So let's analyze. The listening kedushos, ve'in kedushos. So we'll say. So the first question the Gemara says is, obviously, in one case, what you're saying is, right, it is kadosh. Other case, they're saying it's not kadosh. Why do you phrase it in terms of yesh lahen pidyon? They can be redeemed and they can't be redeemed. In other words, they will say, when you say something can be redeemed, that's another way of saying what? That it's kadosh, that it's holy. So it has a holy designation, and therefore, again, you can remove that holy designation or that consecrated designation through redemption. So why don't you just say it's kadosh? In other words, I will say, focusing on the first case over here, I have saplings, and I say these saplings should be a carbon if they are not cut down, which I will say ultimately means what? If they are cut down, then what? Then it's not a carbon, right? Then it's not a carbon. So why not just say that if they're not cut down, ultimately, again, they are kadosh? Why say yesh lahen pidyon? The listening kedushos ve'in kedushos, ayvi debay lemisna seifa ein lahen pidyon. Because Rabbi say, since in the second case we have to indicate that what the items cannot be redeemed, tana nami reisha yesh lahen pidyon. We go ahead and we frame the reisha case as being a case ultimately again where they can be redeemed. Okay, fine. So Rabbi say, so heichi nadar. So the Gemara says, I'm not clear on the neder, right? What exactly? You're like, yeah, me too, right? I'm not clear either, right? So what is the neder that is being made over here? Heichi neder. So here we go. Amar Meimar, ba'omer, im enon niktsasos hayom. So we'll say, what's the case? I'm saying, if these saplings are not cut down today, they should be, what's the lashon? They should be carbon, right? They should be like a carbon. So, in other words, obviously, we'll say, what am I doing? In other words, what's the point of this neder? What am I doing? I'm trying to go ahead and get these saplings cut down, right? That's what I'm trying to do over here. And what I say is, if they are not cut down today, right, right, if ultimately, again, they're not cut down today, then ultimately, again, they should be a carbon. They should be a carbon. Good. We'll say, take a look for just a moment at the Ran. It's the second wide line. So the Ran says over here, Heichi nadar amarav, perish lishna kashle diktani im einon niktsatzos, v'chevan shetali sur b'tnaize, heich yochol alei iser, v'asofon lektitze umdos. Now we'll say, what's really driving the Gemara is as follows. Saplings, ultimately, again, trees are ultimately cut down. So the tree is going to be cut down. So what's the case over here? Though the kashle about talis, go skip a little bit. Actually, no, fine, that's good. Let's go back to the Gemara. So the Gemara says as follows. The case over here is, so the neder I'm making is, if these saplings are not cut down today, they should be like a carbon. Okay? And what happened? The day passed, and they were not cut down. So you will say, just to understand what's bothering the Gemara, right? What's bothering the Gemara is, if we just read the neder as it is, that what? If these are not cut down, they should be a carbon. The trees are ultimately going to be cut down. At some point, as I was saying, Gemara is operating under the assumption that people have trees for what purpose? What purpose? For wood, right? For wood. So at some point in time, this tree is going to get cut down. So if I know that ultimately the tree is going to get cut down, what's the point of the neder? In other words, what is the neder accomplishing? To which the Gemara says, no, let's refine it a little bit. Amemar says, the cases where I say, if these saplings are not cut down today, they should become a neder. So what happens? Sure enough, the day goes by, and they weren't cut down. Shabbos says, now what's the halacha? The day goes by, they weren't cut down. What's the halacha? They're usher. They're carbon. So the Gemara says, okay, imkein lamali lemimar. So I don't understand why does the Mishnah need this case? Shabbos says, it seems like a pretty straightforward case that doesn't really require inclusion in the Mishnah. So pshita lo tzricha. Here we go. So the Gemara says, you're right. What's the case? Kigom deika zeka nefisha. Ooh. Shabbos say, watch this. This is so exciting. What's the case? The case I'm talking about over here is where the day that I'm making the neder, there's a very strong wind. And kind of what I'm assuming is what's going to happen over the course of the day. The wind is going to knock down the trees. So in other words, my intention over here when making this neder is that the trees themselves were going to get knocked over by the strong wind. And now what ends up happening? They don't. So halach l'maisa, the Mishnah tells me, therefore my neder goes into effect, and ultimately, again, the trees become aser. So once I take a look at the Ran again, so the Ran is in the widest lines, about 7 lines in. And I will say, had the Mishnah not told me that now the trees, since they weren't cut down, become like a carbon, I would have thought, Kevan de Masika Daite, so you know what this sounds like a little bit? It's almost like this is an asmachta. In other words, the Havamina is, I never had in mind that these trees should become carbon. The only reason I felt confident saying that the trees should become carbon is why? Because it was a big wind. And I was absolutely confident that the trees were going to get knocked over. So the Havamina is that maybe such a neder shouldn't go into effect because it's so clear that I never intended for it to do so. Kamash Balan, you made it, right? So live with it. Dvarim Shebalev Einam Dvarim, like we said before, you made it, and therefore the neder goes into effect. Gemara says, but here's the problem. V'hakatani legabe talis, v'talis l'sreifa kaima. Shabbos say, here's the problem. The Mishnah gives 2 cases, right? Case number one was if these trees aren't cut down today. Case number 2 is if this talis isn't burned today. So I understand the case of the trees. Ultimately, again, I'm making the neder on a day of gale force winds, right? These strong winds. So I'm making it confident it's going to get knocked down. What's the parallel case by a talis? If this talis isn't burned today, ultimately, again, it should become a carbon. I'm expecting the talis to be burned in Kigom Di'ika Deleka. Yeah, what's what we're talking about? The case is where there's a raging fire. Hachanami Di'ika Zeka Nefisha. So to over here, we're talking about again by the case of the trees where there's a very strong wind. Let's put this case together. So now I understand what's happening over here. So what's happening over here is I'm standing by my saplings. There is a gale force wind. I'm looking at this and I'm saying to myself, what's going to happen? Those trees are coming down. So I make a neder. And what's the neder? If these trees don't come down today, they're a carbon. And I will say, what happens? Right? The winds change course. The trees remain standing. So I will say, here we go. I would have thought, I'm going to say that again. It's so clear in what's my intention? Hey, my intention was not that these trees should become a carbon. My intention was not, why I'm making this statement is irrelevant. But the I made it because I felt so confident that those trees are coming down because of the gale force winds. Therefore, I would have thought that even when they don't come down, the neder should not be chal, since it is so clear that I'm only making it because I'm so confident that it's coming down. Kamash Balan. What's that Kamash Balan? You made it. Dvarim shebalev einam dvarim. Any qualifications you're thinking about don't really matter, and therefore again the neder is a binding neder. So when it turns out that those saplings don't come down on that day, in fact they do attain carbonic status, prohibited status. I will say, because again it's amazing. Whatever you say in life, you have to live with the reality of your words. You didn't mean it, or I meant something else. All we can go by is what you say. And at the end of us, an incredible mussar in terms of how careful we have to be in general with measuring our words. Because even though I might think I meant something different, or I had in mind something different, the world judges me, right? My relationships judge me, not on what I'm thinking, but ultimately, again, on the spoken word. So we'll stop over here for today. Shkoyach.